If your boss that was difficult didn't say that to you about the side hustle, do you think you would have continued it as a side hustle, or do you think you would have eventually jumped and done it? What do you think would have happened? Like, let's imagine she wasn't a jerk.
This is a great question. I actually did a lot of work while I was on maternity leave. And when I went back to work, I had gotten a new boss, and she was horrible to me. She was recently divorced. She didn't have kids. She was past the age of bearing a child. And, she was very, I think, resentful of me. And she said to me, I heard about your side hustle, and if you do it on my time, there's going to be consequences. And so I knew in that moment that I had to make a decision. And I said to my husband, what's the worst that happens? I come back and get a new job. I took the leap and I left, and I really went all into BumpClup, and that's how it started. I do think that I would have eventually jumped. I don't think I would have jumped so soon. So prior to her, I had this boss while I was pregnant. He was a male, and he had 5 children, and he just let me do my own thing. And, I ran like a $5 million territory, and I was one of their top performers. So it was silly that you would be such a jerk to me, and it was just kind of dumb. But
it makes no sense. It makes no sense because with sales, it's all metrics based. If you make your number, go do whatever you want.
And nothing was broken. So my gut when I went back to work was, I'm going to go back to work for as long as I can and see what happens. And I was only there for 3 weeks. So I think I would have lasted a little bit longer had I not been basically bullied, which I was, it was like, she really tried to make my life difficult.
I also love the insight about the need to be in person and connected. But one of the challenges with in person that you don't get with online as much is that it is perceived as more difficult to scale. And yet you did. This became one of the businesses that is women run, that is part of the 2% that make it over $1 million in revenue. So talk to me about how it went from an awesome idea with some get-togethers in Chicago and you're having your baby to a 7-figure business.
Essentially, I think at the time, you have to remember there was no social media. So the online options were meetup.com. And I was basically hell no. I'm not finding people through meetup.com. That's weird. I mean, maybe it wasn't, but to me it was. And I wanted the in-person connection. We were transplants in Chicago. We didn't have family here. I needed to build my family, my friends who were family. And that's what I did through BumpClup. And so, initially it was really word of mouth. It was me blogging because there was no social media. But what happened was women would come, they would experience BumpClup. I was very, very meticulous about following up and doing surveys and making changes and giving these women what they wanted. And a lot of it was what I wanted, to the point that as the first kind of group started having our babies, they were like, well, what's next? Are you going to let us continue coming? Because we want to come. And so I wasn't planning to do mom stuff until much later. And I ended up hosting my first mom event 6 weeks postpartum. It was a brunch. I brought in a sleep expert. So it was great for me. It was I was building this as I needed it because of word of mouth and people were having such great experiences at these events. I started getting calls from other cities and from women in other cities who were we want to bring BumpClup to our city. At the same time, our events were growing in Chicago. They were very big. They were up to 100, 125 people. We were at max capacity. We often had wait lists for our dinners. And again, it was all word of mouth. It was me being smart about grassroots marketing, which was a very big part of this. I went into all the maternity boutiques, none of which exist anymore, had cards at the register. They were partners of mine. They would send emails on my behalf. And I would drive people into their store. So it was a very big win-win. It was a lot of partnership marketing. And so 2 things happened at first. I had a group of women who became brand ambassadors of BumpClup. And they helped at events. And I paid them not in money, but in product and in free events. Okay. And one of those women said, I'm moving to Austin. Can I take BumpClup with me? I can't live without it. And because she had been a customer of mine and knew everything in and out, I let her do that. And so that was our first additional city, was Austin, Texas.
Okay.
I also had a high school friend who lived there who ended up joining her. And she was actually the one who ended up taking it over for the long run. She was my employee for a long time. And then I had a woman from Minneapolis reach out to me. And she was like, all my friends in Chicago are coming to your events. This is now a very dear friend of mine. She's a mom of 4 girls. So at the time she had 1. And she was like, I need to do this. And she flew down on her own dollar and came to one of my big events that year. I taught her how to run it. We had conversations, and she became one of my employees. And she was my employee through after the sale. I mean, she was there almost as long as me. And so those were kind of the two initial like big jumps that we scaled. And the next thing that happened, we ended up having people from LA and San Francisco. I think the interesting thing to point out was those didn't work. And I think that they didn't work because initially we ended up kind of switching the model. They didn't work because these women had never come to BumpClup. And I flew out there. It was actually when I was pregnant with my second. And I would train them and teach them. Also, the cities are very different than Austin and Minneapolis. And in terms of like logistics in the city, people in San Francisco don't want to cross the Golden Gate Bridge to go to dinners. Right. So our big event that we did every month in Minneapolis and Austin and Chicago didn't work in San Francisco. And so it just was like, it showed us that you really need to know the market and know the city and the people and how they work in it before you go into the market. And so
know the city and know BumpClup. Yeah. That's the other insight.
Yes.
It's like you really have to be an ambassador, have experienced it. So it was sort of like you expanded from Chicago with people who were there and then we're going to other markets. Okay,
yes.
That's great.